tonight, if you haven't realized by now, this is not Christopher Ram. This is Akola Thompson speaking to you. Tonight we have a special segment for the International Women's Day, which is on March 8th, tomorrow. And with me tonight, I have Adriana Stevens, who will be talking all about International Women's Day, which the theme is Press for Progress, right? Yeah, so that encapsulates so much, and we'll be trying to touch on a lot of issues. So, Adriana, you've been telling me a bit about International Women's Day, and what do you think about the theme this year, Press for Progress?
Well, it's an interesting theme. Of course, it encapsulates a whole lot of things because we need progress in so many areas, especially in our justice systems, right, as it relates to women on a whole and people on a whole. So it's interesting this year that we have such a wide theme that we can have so many focus areas on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. When we think about pressing for progress, there's so many things that can be taken out of that. You mentioned the justice system. Now, not only in Guyana but across the Caribbean, across the world, when you think about women being abused or sidelined or something, whenever they go to get avenues to justice, these are not they don't necessarily always get it because of various reasons. For instance, when we talk about things such as sexual harassment or rape, particularly in those cases, whenever you do get into the justice system, that's if you are believed of these issues. That's the first thing, because we have all these issues of where we victim blame. We basically tell persons, that while this that might have happened to you is tragic, then maybe it was your fault because you were dressed a certain way, you were doing certain things you shouldn't have been doing, and these all kind of hinders a lot of persons from coming forward, right? So when we think about pressing for progress, I think we really need to think about how we've been thinking about certain issues related to women and how we might be stemming the conversation on it.
Yes, absolutely. Because I mean, especially when it comes to rape and sexual violence, like you mentioned, it's really a pressing issue around the world. It's not only in Guyana, and most times we don't even reach to the justice system,
Hmm.
right? Sometimes, most of the times, women, children, the younger girls are afraid to speak out against these things, right? Things may happen in the home and they don't say anything about it. So it's not only that it doesn't even meet to the point where the justice system gets into the problem, right? Sometimes it don't even meet there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true, because one of the largest barriers we have when it comes to dealing with cases of sexual abuse is the reporting of these
The
crimes,
reporting,
right?
yes.
Because we've created a culture wherein everybody either shuts up about sexual violence. It's a touchy conversation.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to go there. That's murky waters, right? So, of course, we never have reports coming forward, and even when we do, persons are not encouraged, really, because, as I said before, they're blamed for their experiences, whether they had any part to play in it or not. And even if they did, that doesn't matter, right? Because if you were a victim of something, then the only person who should be blamed is the person who perpetuated that violence
exactly.
against you, right? And on this on the topic of sexual violence, now, our the Student Society Against Human Rights Violations, in collaboration with the Life in Leggings Caribbean Alliance Against Gender-Based Violence, will be holding our second annual march on this Saturday, March 10th. We're starting at 3 o'clock at Coffee Square, and we're marching straight down Brickdam to Stabrook. Now, the theme of our march, we're focusing on persons in positions of power and trust whose actions constitute violence against women. Now, when we talk about those in power, we're talking about all those employers, the politicians, the children who would basically send women to psychiatric institutions without any due process. In this case, I'm talking about Yugi Farrell from the St. Vincent's and the Grenadines, who was a former model and was sent to a psychiatric institution on the, well, not orders per se, but the influence definitely was there. Yes, where she was sent there because there was some kind of intimate relationship between the prime minister's son. Yeah, it was a whole big deal. It was a really whole big deal. So you see how people can use their positions of power to basically influence you, curtail your life, and all these things. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay. Well, basically, most people in power today are men. Most of them, right? So we must acknowledge that most of the persons in power today are men.
Well, it's kind of always been that way, if you ask me.
Yeah, because here we are talking about International Women's Day, right? And most of our leaders in the world are men, right? Most persons in power are men. So, with the masculinity and also the power that they get from their position, they feel then that they can do just about anything to people in general, especially women, right? And I don't think that's correct. That's not the way to have things in the world, to do things.
Yeah, and it all comes back to the way in which men are kind of judged differently from how women are.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So while, say, I'm a man, I do something, you might hear a little hoorah or something,
Yeah.
but no real results will come out of that. But say a woman does it now, wow, she's judged so very differently in these situations, right?
Yeah, women are given a different margin or some sort of scale that we have to live up to. We have to work 10 times as hard as a man to get the same sort of recognition as a man at times. And it's not right. It's not right. Women around the world, in Guyana, we need to start standing up for our rights. We need to start pushing forward. Women are the backbone of men, right? Because, women bring forth child, right? So without women, there is no man. So we really need to start looking up, make sure that our women has some place and an important role in society. And
one of the things I've noticed, it hasn't been that women haven't been pushing for equality, right? Because we've had so many movements that have been happening in around the Caribbean, across the regions, where women are actively fighting for their rights.
Right.
But then again, as you mentioned, there are these persons in power who would basically curtail these movements or seek to infiltrate them to just keep things as they are.
Yes.
Because if you're gaining from the status quo, then why should you change anything, right?
yes, the status quo is set. Nobody wants to change it for the better.
Yeah, for the better, because when you think about equality, people always think that when well, I'm a feminist, right? So whenever I say that and I talk about equality, people always get this really warped idea about what equality means, right? And it's kind of telling when you speak to men about equality, and then some of their responses would be like, oh, so women want to take over now, women want to do this. And it's interesting that that's the automatic point they go to, right? Because by saying that, they're telling me that they recognize their role and how how women are mistreated in society. Because that's the first thing they go to. They know very well how women are treated, right? And they're scared that they themselves might be treated the way we've been.
Yeah, I don't know, men. It's surprising that in a day and age like today, that the world has evolved so far and come so far, that persons are still thinking in that way, that women's place are behind the men, right? They're supposed to be our leaders. They're supposed to be there, and we're supposed to follow their every move and these things. And it's not about taking over a man's place. A man's place will always be a man's place. But it's more about gender parity. We need to be on par with them, right? So as to have the nation move forward in a positive light.
Yeah, and one point you brought up there, I found interesting because we place so much stock into gender roles about what what a man should be, what a woman should be, and all of this causes so much problems because if you're basically saying that ideas are basically set for one gender, then any deviation from this is seen as abnormal and it's basically attacked, and that's why we have so many women being murdered and killed, say for their opinions or the different way of life in countries such as the Middle East. We have
Africa. They're terrible.
Well, everywhere is terrible if you ask me, because wherever you look across nations, there will always be an oppressed people, right? And oppressed people are usually the women. Easy pickings, right?
Yes.
So kind of institute that violence against.
It starts very early, if I'm to say it. For me, it starts in the home, where we have our young boys and our young girls, and we teach them certain things differently. We have the boys, let's say the boys do the yard work because men are supposed to do yard work. And the women cook the food because women is supposed to cook the food, right? So it starts very early when we start training them in the home to do specific things, right? And then when they grow up, they fall into that same bracket of society, and then they teach their children the same thing. So then is when we'd have this thing repeating itself throughout history. Right? So the roles, even in the home, are separate for boys and for girls, right? So we need to start doing those little things that, to include, say there's no boy work, there's no girl work. Everybody should be involved in some way in everything, so that we don't have that separation of the genders from a very young age.
Yeah, and it definitely does start young, because I have a 5-year-old, right? And we talk all the time. Now, anybody who knows me knows I have like open conversations with her just to try to get her to understand certain things. And I'd be like, okay, not because pink is associated with girls means that's the only color you should like, and stuff like that, right? But of course, children get ideas from outside too, right? They're outside in the world. They're observing a lot of information. So it's always up to you, the parent, the guardian, to kind of hone those thoughts. See how best you can deal with those, because if you don't challenge those ideas, then as you rightfully said, when they grow up, they fall into the same very gendered role, which we don't necessarily want. Because when we think about the issue of gender-based violence, for instance, right? Now, gender-based violence is basically wherein the violence perpetuated is used by the unequal power relationships between gender, right? Now, technically speaking, women are unequal to men, because in terms of they're not getting the fair pay, they're not getting protection, they're not believed in the same way in certain situations. So definitely in that way we're unequal. Now, how necessarily, we can continue to tell people to talk to your children, and that's great. It's good to tell them to talk to your children, let the upcoming generations know what's the right way to do stuff. But at the same time, I think we need so much more re-education for the older folks, because as they're the ones bringing up these children. Right? So how do we even go about doing this?
Well, first, we probably have to spread the awareness throughout the world, and especially in Guyana. If we can have more women talks, seminars that women folks can attend, that would help with the education part of it, right? And then they'd have to go to the homes and then teach their younger folks, the younger children, what they've learned, and so I think we'd have to start with some sort of seminars or something that women can attend to educate them on these gender issues, because at first thing we need to accept is that this is a problem, right? Because without acknowledging that it is a problem, then we can move forward. So if we acknowledge it's a problem, then we need to meet to find solutions to solve it. You know, meaningful discussion. It doesn't have to be a whole big thing. You know, women, folks among certain communities can just meet to discuss, you know, what their feelings and these things, and that of itself would help.
Well, I definitely think we do need spaces for women to have these conversations. But you know, a lot of times I've seen a lot of these little events where it's just dominated by women. And while that's a good thing, when we think about actually effecting change, it makes no sense having a conversation with half of the people,
Yes.
right? And whenever I go to these conferences or events promoting equality, there's an absolute absence of men. You don't see men there. And I was asking one of my friends the other day, because this is a guy very involved in women's rights, etc. But he's almost never at these events. So I asked him, "Why aren't you there?" He said he doesn't feel welcome, right? Because he feels like it's just a female event. But you see, I have a problem with people like my friend, because if the only reason you won't participate in activities aimed to promotion of safety, equality, justice, if that's the only reason you won't participate, then what you're basically saying is that well, you're an ally but in fair weather. I don't quite understand how the logic quite works, but I get your idea about having more of these open conversations,
Yes.
and definitely we need to talk more about these issues.
Of course.
Yeah, because a lot of times when they do come up, we tend to just stifle them down, say, okay, that might not be the best time or place, and stuff like that. So definitely I feel conversations are a way to go.
Yeah, we need men involved in these things, of course, because I mean, the women are already in the minority, um, so we need the men there that, you know, to support and help carry out certain responsibilities and things.
Yeah.
So,
And I was to pick up back this point earlier because I mentioned one of the concepts of our march is against persons in positions of trust also, right? Now, when we speak about persons in positions of trust, not a lot of persons understand this, right? Because when we speak about them, we're speaking about the family members, we're talking about the pastors, the teachers, all of these persons who are in trustworthy positions but abuse these positions to sexually groom, violate, and all of these things, right? And yeah, that's one of the basic concepts that we will be looking at. Now, why do you think that it's so hard for people to grasp the idea of abusing a position of trust? I have my own theories. Let me hear some of yours.
well, I'm not sure the trustworthy persons, um, it actually probably has to go back to their values and their morals, because to me, if a person is gonna abuse their position, or as you said, they're put in a position of trust where they abuse it, then it goes back to who that person is and their values and their morals, right? So what do you think on it though?
Okay, when it comes to people in positions of trust, I think a large part of it has to do with the enablers in society. Because, as you rightfully said, it really comes down to the person. If they feel like they can abuse a situation, they will. And so I think it comes really to the point where we have to also start holding enablers accountable. Because say for instance, you know that somebody is abusing a child or sexually grooming children and these things, but you let that continue unhindered. Maybe the person is an upstanding member in society. Maybe they're a trusted and respected Muslim scholar. All of these things, right? Then you don't necessarily want the enablers, that is, they won't necessarily see this person as a direct threat. They might find it uneasy, but then they're really weighing against, well, this is a good person, they've been doing all these good things for the community, a few scarred children.
Yeah, that doesn't matter to them. I understand that.
Yeah, and so I think we really need to start looking at the enablers also, as much focus as we're putting on the perpetrators of these violent acts, because these things can't continue if you don't have a space where it is encouraged or it's allowed to happen, right?
Yeah, so when we say enablers, we talk about those persons that just sit back and do nothing when they know something is happening, something is occurring in their presence, right? So we really need to hold them responsible also. They're as guilty as the perpetrators as far as I see it.
Yes, they definitely are. I don't think that a lot of people understand that you have a legal duty to actually report cases of child abuse, sexual harassment, these sort of things. So yeah, if you know of these things, you are legally bound to report it, right?
Yeah, I heard there's some talks right now on the radio, and so that actually speaks on child abuse and these things, and there's a child abuse hotline that you can call to report certain things now. So yes, it's actually very serious and we need to report these things.
Yes, definitely. I'm glad you brought up that point about the hotline, because I've seen a lot of work being done in the area. I also want to bring up this Report Abuse Guyana platform that we've been working on. Now, the Report Abuse Guyana, it's our website, www.reportabusegi.com. Now, how it works, you can basically report sexual violence cases online via short form.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you submit that application now, we have site monitors who will take that information depending on whether it's a child or an adult. It'll be filtered to the Child Protection Agency or the Guyana Police Force. Now, also, aside from the forwarding of reports, we realized that we needed to offer support systems also. So counseling, these things are also part of the platform, and we've been partnering with agencies like Help and Shelter, Red Thread, and all of these places to kind of encourage reporting and also provide victim support services. Through partners, we have things like tracking through the court system if they do decide to go that avenue, provide counseling, even shelter, and these sort of things, and legal aid.
General support, because women that actually go the extra mile to carry it to the court system. I mean, even though they're viewed to society as being, somebody different. Like it's very hard to hold your head high in high esteem and to say that you're in some court system or something fighting an abuser. People don't really look at you as the victim. They do victim blaming, like you said earlier. The victim blaming is wrong. But I have a question on the reporting online.
Yeah.
So persons' names. The names of persons who are reporting the matters, would that be confidential or not?
Well, the names, really, you do require names for police reports, right? So you do require the names, but we've been very concerned about confidentiality. So we only have a very, 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 very small team of persons who have access to the reports being made. And these are all persons who have had years of experience in these matters, dealing with child care and protection and gender-based violence and stuff. So it's not just we don't use volunteers for this. It's strictly persons who have years of experience with this.
Okay, because I think that too would be a problem, because persons want to speak out sometimes, and then they don't want their names to be mentioned, you know,
Yes.
persons. So we should try to afford them some sort of confidentiality so that when they speak out against these violence, that, you know, their names don't end up coming in the newspapers or on the news or
Yes.
something. Yeah, so that there is just what I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, definitely. Confidentiality was one of our biggest concerns. We were very worried about who gets to handle the information. So, very small team of people who've been working for years in organizations such as Red Thread, Help and Shelter. Really, only NGOs dealing with gender-based violence and these sort of things. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, we've kind of went a bit.
Yes, we've drifted.
Okay, now when we think about International Women's Day, which is tomorrow,
Yes.
and when we think about that and the theme of what's the pushing
Press for progress.
Press for progress. There we go.
Yes.
Press for progress. Now there's so many things that we need progression on, and a lot of them we seem to be stuck at a standstill. Now, one of the things has been around for ever issues of unequal pay
Yes.
in the workplace. Now, I have some friends, and when they told me this story, I was so shocked because these are women who've worked for years. They're very experienced in their professions, right? They've worked for years, and then by chance they would have learned about how much their other colleagues would make, right? And they told me the stories, and it wasn't surprising. It was not surprising. I'm ashamed that we live in a world where it's not surprising, where more experienced women get paid less, mainly because they might be women, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, if you're doing if it's the thing is, if a man had the position, right, would he been paid the same amount that the woman is being paid, right? So we must and employers, I don't know if they don't feel some sort of guilt inside, you know. They say women are very emotional, but we need to be emotional about some of these issues, right?
I think they use that emotional argument to just sidetrack the conversation.
Yes, that was they say, but I think emotions are best way of dealing with issues, because if you don't have emotions, then you're not passionate about something. Then if you're not passionate about something, then it doesn't go too well for you. You need to have some sort of passionate something to be passionate about, right? But the unequal pay for women, it's totally it's so back in the day that I really think that once women are doing the same job as a man, in the same position, in the same capacity, with its same responsibilities, then she should be paid as if just as a man would be paid for that position or for that work, right? We shouldn't have unequal pay grades just because someone is a woman, right? Because she's doing the same work at the end of the day. So we need to get this unequal pay thing. It's not right. It doesn't sit well with me.
It doesn't sit well with me either. Right? I don't think it sits well with a lot of women.
Women on the whole, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, because there are some women out there today, and I know this for a fact because I've been having some conversations with women, and there are some women who feel that, you know, it's okay for them to be paid less than men.
Yeah, I know some women like those too. We've had some colorful conversations regarding this subject. But I think it's important to recognize that even while we have women who sometimes seem to uphold the same sort of oppressive concepts surrounding womanhood, what women deserve, what women should be able to do, and all of these things, I think it's important to recognize it as internalized misogyny, right? Because everything is kind of based upon the hatred of women and ensuring that the women stay in a place, right?
Yeah.
So
women must know their place.
Yeah, women must basically know their place, and then
Yeah.
what happens is that women are basically set up to police other women, to uphold these same sort of systems.
Correct.
So yeah, I think it's important to just add that bit there, that it's kind of internalized misogyny, and there's a lot of, I don't know how we can quite root that out, right? The one thing I'm big on is conversations, but there's a limit to conversations also.
Yes,
So
yes.
what else can we do? All of these sensitizations projects, they seem to be doing a bit of work, but I'm interested in more radical measures. How precisely do we achieve this, right? Now, as we were talking, I was thinking about the concepts of empowerment, right? And this is a buzzword I've heard been thrown around for a very long time. It's become like a snappy song bites. You see in all the
Yes.
advertisements, women empowerment, these sort of things. And it always kind of bothers me because I feel like they're removing the essentialness of what women empowerment really means. Because when we talk about it, it's not just like shiny little packages, because we deal with very, very real issues,
Yeah.
right? It's about sexual rights, it's about political participation, it's about equal pay and all of these things. And when I say political participation, let me clarify myself. Like one time we talked about political participation, and then someone asked me to explain what I meant by that. Now, what I meant by that is that I think you mentioned the point earlier about women coming out, standing for their rights, right?
Correct.
Now, we in Ghana here, we have a society wherein basically everybody is kind of individualistic, right? So if something does not directly affect you, then you don't necessarily see a lot of people standing up for it. But the thing is, if something happens to them, they expect you to stand with them.
Yes, yes.
Right? So when we speak about political participation, it means mobilizing all of these women, men, allies, everybody for your collective goals. And I think we really need to get over this whole kind of individualistic culture and think more in collectives. Because how else then do we really achieve this?
It's true because I mean, the International Women's Day, we celebrate and we collaborate the whole social, economical, political, all the aspects of women achievement and the progress that we want to make within these areas. So being political in that sense that we need to be collective together, then we really need to push for collectivity and stop the individualism, you know.
Yes.
So because as the saying goes, no man is an island, right? We need persons there. And for me, I always think that, you know, if I was in this position, I would have wanted this. So when I see someone in a position, then I would think to myself, what would I have wanted if I was in that position? You know, so I would go to help them and to do the same measures as that I would have wanted someone to do for me, right? So the whole concept of being there collectively together is one that we really need to work on as women, as Guyanese on the whole. We need to work together collectively because we need to, by now we should realize that, you know, nothing can go off of one person or few.
Which is what a lot of
Few.
persons expect. They expect
Yes.
a small number of people to enact change. And when change happens, well, everybody celebrates, right?
Correct. I remember only the other day we were talking about a situation on the University of Guyana campus, right? And there was a students meeting to we were talking about the increases in fees, right? And there was a student meeting, and you could have counted the number of persons present, right? Now I'm saying if we want to pressure administration to let the students' voice be heard, then we need participation from students. So if students don't come out, then there's no collective participation. Few of us can't have anything changed, right? So the collectivity is a really big point that we need to work on. We really need to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one of the things that I want to touch on, I know we've talked around it for a bit,
Yeah.
but it's the issue of sexual rights then, right? Now, when I talk about sexual rights, we're talking about things such as consent, the right to say no, the right to not be coerced into saying yes, and all of these things, the right to have bodily autonomy, right? Because when we think about bodily autonomy and what it means, it really means a lot to womanhood in general, because so many things are policed, from your reproductive organs to what you wear, and it can really be frustrating at times. Now, on the concept of consent, now a few weeks ago, our student society, we had a booth on the UG campus where we talked about sexual health, reproductive rights, etc. And we weren't expecting little children to come. We honestly thought it was just high schoolers, like 4th, 5th form children.
Yeah,
but then we saw
normally.
these little 9-year-old, 10-year-olds come to our booths, and we're like, okay, how are we gonna broach this now? No, but we talked about things such as consent. We talked about different sexualities, and they learned so quickly, right? And one of the first questions I asked was about consent. It was like a little 8-year-old boy. I asked him, do you know what consent is? And right off the bat, he says, yes, I know. And he gave me a spot-on definition of what consent is. He was like, in child appropriate terms, he was like, miss, if I say I don't want nobody to touch me, nobody should touch me.
Yeah.
Right? And that is basically what consent is.
Yeah.
And on the topic of sexual coercion, now this is a bit of a more murky area for some people. I don't feel like it should be, but it definitely can be murky for some people, because sexual coercion, no. Why it's murky is because a lot of times when people are coerced, they're coerced into saying yes,
Yes.
right? And they might say, well, that's consensual sex. But if you have to basically coerce persons, whether it's fear or through constant repetition of asking them to do something, then it's clear that they don't want to do it, right?
Yeah, it's true. We need to teach our women and people in general that you shouldn't be afraid to say no. Let your no be no's and let your yeses be yeses, right? You shouldn't be afraid to say no. So, and people should not force you then or coerce you then to say yes. Because then if you're going to be a bother all the time, then more than likely after some sort of time someone would say yes, and it's not right for someone to be forced into saying yes, especially when it comes to sexual activities, right? Persons must be able to specifically and say no, and you stop there. I mean, because we know that sexual activities, persons that force you, sometimes it's not even strangers, right? So you should say no and let your no be no. So consent is a very big topic out there that we need to enlighten people on, that don't be afraid to say no. Sometimes our little girls out there, they're afraid that if I say no to uncle, then he's going to beat me, or he's going to do this and he's going to do that, right? But we need to let them know that saying no is not wrong.
A lot of women do say no, and they still get violated. I feel like when we talk about consent, I usually try to frame it towards the men rather than to the women, because in almost all the cases I've heard about, when we talk about consent, the women are the ones saying no, the men are the ones continuing, right? So I think when we frame in a conversation, it definitely should be more towards the men, because not a lot of men understand consent. I don't know if it's a direct refusal to even try to understand, but they just don't. And even if they do understand consent, one of the favorite lines about why persons will seek consent then is like, "Bye, I don't want to go jail," right? I literally heard that line so many times. Wherein the only thing stopping men then from forcing or coercing is that they don't want to go jail. I mean, yeah, but shouldn't the more important detriment to that be that you just don't want to violate
Right.
somebody's right? Because when we speak about bodily autonomy, we're speaking about a person, and when we think about a person, everybody has rights. They have the right to freedom. They have the right to what goes into their body, what doesn't go into their body, who touches them, who doesn't touch them. So definitely all these things, and I don't think men understand consent. And as I'm thinking about this, I'm remembering a conversation I had with a bus driver about 2 weeks ago. Now, I don't know if you followed up the story about there was a police woman, I think it was a policewoman and a policeman who went to a hotel together, and then she alleged rape, right?
Okay. Yes.
Did you hear about that? Yeah. So I wasn't really following up the story, and then I was asked about it on my way down in the bus, and he was asking my opinions on it. And I said, well, I don't really have any opinions because I don't quite know the story. And he was like, well, I saying that she lying because one, why she going to a hotel the time of night with the man? Two, this man probably carries she out for buy she dinner and drinks. So he's basically saying that these things are payments, right? A man takes you out for dinner or drinks, then that's basically consent for sex.
No, that's not what it entails. I mean, yes, going there, probably it was the intention to do that, right? But we can't necessarily say that she had consented. And even if she has gone there at the hour of the night, right, intending to do it, once she has changed her mind, then consent was withdrawn.
Yes.
Right? So they need to understand that we can withdraw our consent, just that we can give it, we can withdraw it. Right? So even if I had meet to the room and everything, right, and then I decided that, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, then that's a withdrawal of consent. So that not because she has gone to the room or gone to a hotel with a man, that means that she had consented to have sexual activities go on between them, right? So consent of a whole can be withdrawn at any point in time, and we need to understand that.
Yes, definitely. You know, so many people think that consent is something static. Once you give it, well, that's it. It cannot be changed, right? And that's why there was this thing circulating on the news media a short while back. It isn't in Guyana, but they were looking at this consent app, wherein you can basically give your consent if you're going out. You know, you might get drunk or something, you can give your consent before. And I found it so problematic because consent can be withdrawn. Now, what if you go out, you have fun, yeah, but at the end of the night, you change your mind about having sex? If you use that app now, and that person say, well, she gave me consent, then that's basically free range to violate someone, right?
I haven't heard about that app. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I found it so worrying that so many people were supporting it because they didn't seem to understand the dangers that this might actually pose.
So, if at some point, at the end of the night, you're not drunk, then have you still given your consent for something?
Well, basically, it was very problematic. I hope it doesn't get past the phase it is in currently, because if we keep promoting the idea that consent is something that once you give it, well, then that's it, then we'll have so many more cases of rape, so many cases of harassment, and then we won't have any legal footing for anything. Not really that we have any legal footing, kind of no, because you know, you go into the court systems, your cases get thrown out for the simplest of reasons, and even if you do, then you have to deal with a jury. Now, when we think about juries are made up of persons in the society, right? So it all comes back to what you're teaching people, right? And I know there was this one case in the media again. I read a lot of these stories. Yeah, so there was this one case wherein a young girl was raped, and her case was taken to court, and it was seen over by a jury. Now, even though some jury members believed that she was raped by this person, etc., they weren't really looking at that. They were looking more at the girl. It was about the victim blaming, right? So even though they know this is an adult person, this is a child, they were looking at things about why wasn't the mother there? Why was the girl looking like that? Why was she so brave? And these sort of things, you know, because they have ideas about what a victim should be. And it comes back to the ideas about who gets violated, right? Because from a young age, we're always told that only certain kinds of women get harassed or raped.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, they tend to put it in this frame that, you know, if you dress a certain way, if you speak a certain way, if you do certain things, if you go certain places, then you look for it. You know, and it's not necessarily that way. It's not necessarily that way.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Kisia branch case that we had recently. That thing was so mind-numbing. I could not believe. I mean, certain things don't surprise me anymore, but when I looked at that Kisia branch case, it kind of laid bare a lot of things to me. Because here we have a teacher who people were saying that because she was a teacher, she wasn't supposed to be out at bars. And what was she doing on the road at 3 o'clock?
Teachers have a personal life. They need to understand that, you know, everybody in authority, ministers, all of them, they have personal lives. And sometimes you find them curtailing what they really want to do because of their status in society. And we should really not put things like that in person's mind, in the perspective like that, you know. So her being out 3 o'clock in the morning is not something unusual for a person. We shouldn't just see, oh, she's a teacher, then why she's out. Everybody needs that some sort of space, you know, their freedom to do what they want. And so
yeah, regardless of whether you're a teacher or somebody in some high positions, even if you're a sex worker selling your services. No, this is one of the things I wanted to bring up, because when we think about sex workers, well, they're selling a service, right? And then people have the idea that because they're selling this service, well, they can be raped. And I find it so asinine because, one, it shows our evaluation of other people, and it kind of shows also the barbaric nature of a lot of humans, in that you could basically say that somebody does not deserve the right to be respected because they might be in a lesser position than you or a lower class and all of these things.
Yeah, it's true. It all comes back to what we discussed about consent before, you understand. So even sex workers can refuse, can deny consent.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who you are.
Correct.
You're a person. You can give consent now. If you change it in 2 minutes, that is your right to do. Okay, so this has been like a really great conversation. The time went very fast. Yeah, so we were talking earlier about the upcoming Women's March we have on Saturday. Now, I hope you guys come out and support that march. It's being held by the Student Society Against Human Rights Violations in collaboration with the Life in Leggings Caribbean Alliance Against Gender-Based Violence. Yeah. Now, that's a long mouthful of names, right? But as I said before, our march is centered against persons in positions of trust and power whose actions constitute violence against women and children. Now, when we were planning this march, we were actually thinking a lot about what we were going to center it on, because yeah, we were going to focus on gender-based violence, but what specifically, right? Because a lot of times these issues come up, and well, we don't really have any conversations on it. For instance, the issue of sexual grooming, abusing of positions of trust, that wasn't a conversation that happened until very recently.
Correct.
In Guyana,
Yeah.
right? Before then, it was just a normal
We
thing.
find that in Guyana especially, we don't have conversations about these things until the issue or some problem has brought it up.
Precisely.
Right. So we need to stop waiting for things to come up or things to happen before we start taking action. Right? So if we do preventative action, then these things wouldn't even be a problem in the first place. But in Guyana, we just wait till things come up to start discussing it, start, ranting and raving about it.
I mean, a lot of this has to do with the normalization of violence we have, where something happens so much, it just becomes normalized. You just accept it.
Yes.
Right? Because I remember when I was going to school, I went to several high schools. And in all of these high schools, well, not all, but most of these high schools, you had male teachers who would be familiar with the female students particularly. And the students knew, the other teachers knew, but even though we felt that, this is something that should not be happening, it's making us uncomfortable. If all the adults around you are encouraging this behavior, then what can you as a child really do to impact that? And that's why I say it's very important for us to not only look at the abusers, because while they are very important, we also need to look at the enablers, those who are enabling them to continue their heinous acts.
Yeah, people would say that, they don't encourage an act, but from the time you stay silent on something that you know that is occurring, then that's a form of encouragement. So they need to know that silence also can be a form of encouragement to these persons. They enable it once they don't speak out about it.
Yeah, we have a very large culture of apathetic people wherein you might know that something is wrong, but you don't care enough to act on it.
Probably.
Right? And then, when we talk about positions of trust, one of the things I wanted to bring up, I don't think we mentioned, was how abusers and perpetrators of violence are seen. Because since I was a child, you just get your little warnings about certain things, right? You're always taught that violent people is this person who jumps out at you in the bush in some dark corner, when in reality is the person at your school,
Correct.
the person at the church, the person in your home, all of these things, and we never quite look at them so closely because, well, who are we to see that the man or the woman or the person that everybody loves and respects is abusive or manipulative or these sort of things, or abusing their positions of power or trust to kind of impact violence, right?
Yeah, I don't know about others, but I know in my home, my mother always told us from the time we were very small that, it doesn't matter is who. It could be your father, your uncle, your this, your that. Must tell me if anybody does this to you. Right?
Talk to your children.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, talking to your children.
It's not, most of the times, it's not strangers that do these things to you.
Yes.
Most of the times.
Yeah, and that's why we say abusing the positions of trust, because
Trust.
they know that you trust them, their family members trust them, so that's how the process of grooming begins. They might start giving you little treats, right? So you're a nice little girl, you're growing nicely, and all of these sort of things. And of course, if you're a young person, then you don't quite know what all of this means. So it's very important for us to talk to our children, tell them what signs they should look out for, ensure that they know there are persons they can talk to about this. Because Guyana does really disappoint me sometimes because we just simply do not talk to our children about certain issues, particularly where sex is concerned. Yeah, I was never talked to about sex. Everything I learned, you had to go into little books, and these are not very accurate. So if you have to go to outside sources for your information, that can be very, very dangerous.
No, parents should always feel comfortable to talk to their children. I always believe that, once you learn things at home, then you don't have to go out to find out from outside sources what these things are, right? So if you learn from in the home from a very young age, because no child is too small for you to talk to them about sex. We have 3-year-olds and little babies being raped.
Yes.
So no child is too small to talk about that. We shouldn't look at the age and say, oh, this girl don't even know anything about that. No, then you need to make them know, make them aware of things. So, and make them feel comfortable to talk to you as the adult, right? Because children needs to be comfortable to say things to, especially their mothers out there. Fathers, it might be a little bit
no, everybody has a role to play. Talk to your children, talk to your daughters, talk to your sons, talk to them about these issues. It's very, very important. Now, it's been so great chatting tonight. And I hope you come to the march on Saturday. Now, Saturday, 3 o'clock, we're assembling at the Coffee Square. Now, please come before 3. We're mobilizing from 2 to 45. We'll have Bravo Arts doing some free face paintings and stuff like that. So come get your colors. All of the paintings will be based on concepts of the march. So ensure you come out for that. He won't be there afterwards. Right? So we'll be marching promptly at 3 down Breakdown to Stabroek Market Square, where we'll have an after program of speeches, cultural performances, etc. We'll also have because I'm somebody who doesn't just like to march, I like to ensure people get some sort of education or something like that. We also partnering with the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association to do on-site testing and blood sugar testing for HIV, etc. So that will all be available at Stabroek Market Square between 4 to 6. And we'll also have SRHR Adventures there doing some group engagements on sexual reproductive health and rights. So definitely do come out for that. And thank you for tuning in.
Yes.